It's not. It's only a few days actually, and you know, Chris, he doesn't take time off easily, I don't think. So you have me instead. Welcome to you all. I do hope that you've had as good a summer as you possibly can. I'm sure some of the universities, I'm looking at Karen, have been dealing with interesting times, shall we say. I'm sure you all have. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Amy to report any apologies, please.
Yep, sure. So we have apologies from Councillor Gledhill, and we have Councillor Coxall here instead. And we also have apologies from Jeff Miles and Miles Adcock.
Thank you, Amy. Now, just, you know, I'm sure everybody is very familiar with the normal Zoom rules, but if I can remind you that you keep yourselves muted if possible, except when you're speaking. And if you could use the raise hand function, if you want to speak, I'll be keeping an eye on that, and Adam will be prompting me if I don't see you. If you can't use the raise hand function on the participant thing, then just wave at me as well, because I'm sure I'll see you. Obviously, as you know, the meeting will be recorded, as is now normal. And if I can discourage you to use the chat function, please, if possible, because that isn't for anything that's material to the discussion, because that's not publicly accessible. So we need to ensure that we're completely transparent on everything. And just in terms of each time we are asked to take a vote on anything, to agree anything, if you can raise your hands on the chat function, and then if you can make sure that you lower your hands again so that we are clear about who's raising the hands for what bit. Thank you very much. So that's just in terms of due process. In terms of the minutes, we're going to go on to the section 2 now, which is the minutes of the meeting. So do we have any comments on the minutes of the last meeting, anybody? No. So if that's everybody's in agreement, are you? Can you all confirm that you're in agreement with the accurate record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. And then obviously declarations of interest, really important. Please also remember to keep up your registers of interest up to date. If you don't know how best to do that, do talk to Amy. I'm sure she'll be able to help you out, but please make sure. So does anyone have any interest to declare for this meeting? No, doesn't sound like it. Great. Okay, I'm going to now hand over to Adam, who's just going to talk briefly about the devolution white paper coming up and the Bayes inquiry on post-pandemic recovery. Adam.
Thank you, Sarah. I just wanted to say a couple of things on those items, really. So, I mean, the devolution white paper takes no real introduction. You know, it's been talked about for quite a while. I think we expect to see it land in September. I guess what's relevant to LEPs in particular is really what it sets out in terms of our role moving forward. We've picked up from a few sources that one of the requests on LEPs is that we're going to be asked to produce recovery and renewal plans, which is a kind of, I guess we'll be using a lot of the work that we've done, or we'll be encouraged to use a lot of the work that we've done already to prepare for the lists, to sort of produce those pieces of work. So in many senses it makes a lot of sense. Obviously a lot of the evidence has been continually updated on the basis of, you know, what's happened out there, and we've reported that to you thus far, and Sharon and Helen will be doing that again later this morning. So we expect that job to do. We don't know much more than that, but I think that'll absolutely you know, set out a way forward for our overarching strategy, at least for the, you know, for the next few, but work certainly for at least the next few months, and then, you know, we wait to see what you know, what that needs to look like. I think importantly, we're told that that's going to come with a good deal of guidance. So I'm very keen that we just wait to see what that guidance is before we go in with both feet. But as you know, we've done an awful lot of work earlier on this year before the pandemic hit. So we're well positioned in terms of that intelligence. We're well positioned in terms of what we think our priorities might be, but obviously that's all subject to change according to whatever it is, whatever tools we have available to us, and whatever the white paper has in store for LEPs moving forward, whatever that is. So we wait with great expectation, and obviously that's got a much broader impact across many different stakeholders and partners on this call, as we know. But I'm just obviously I'm just talking about it from a LEP perspective. So as soon as we hear anything pursuant to the LEP agenda, we'll obviously send that out to the strategic board straight away. And yeah, you can rest assured that we'll do that as soon as it comes through. The other thing I wanted to mention was the Bayes inquiry on post-pandemic economic growth. The LEP network did an all-encompassing response for LEPs on that, which was really talking about the benefit of the benefits that LEPs have brought, what LEPs have delivered over the course of the past few years, and actually what we do to engage businesses in the economic growth agenda. There's a sub-inquiry linked to the overall inquiry on levelling up. And actually we did a short piece of work which I signed off, which we will share with the minutes of this meeting, to really talk about, you've heard Chris say it many times before, about levelling up being about something that's relevant across the whole of the country, not just a north-south issue, but also again making some good points about what this board has been able to do both recently and over the course of the last few years as well. And the benefit of the LEP model in terms of bringing private sector influence on decisions around economic growth is pretty straight. We didn't write an awful lot. It was pretty straightforward stuff, and I would suggest it was completely non-contentious. Hence, I was allowed to sign it off, and rather than darken your door with different variations of the document. But as soon as we share the draft minutes of this meeting, we'll share that as well. So you've got a full record of what we've sent. As I say, what we will do, if we can dig it out, is share the LEP network's response to the overall inquiry, because I thought that was quite interesting. And it's always interesting to see what other LEPs are saying and doing as well. A third thing, and I don't want to sort of speak for too much longer because you want to hear from Louise, Sharon and Helen more than you want to hear from me. But there was, so Bayes released a few reports last week, which looked at, it was comparative analysis of LEPs. It wasn't a ranking of LEPs as such, but it was a look at some of the activities of LEPs, how LEPs are resourced and everything else, which was a snapshot in time that was taken last year, but they only released the reports last week. Fairly interesting stuff. I don't think there was anything particularly shocking. It does make the case for multi-year settlements. It makes the case for a bit more certainty around economic growth funding moving forward, and for better resourcing of LEPs, which is something that I could wholeheartedly support. So I can't recall if we shared those reports when we saw them or not, but certainly if we haven't, we will send them with the inquiry response and with the draft minutes of the meeting as soon as we can after this. And that was it from me, Sarah.
Thank you, Adam. And just to emphasise about this levelling up agenda, I mean, it's absolutely key that we continue to make the case about why the Southeast isn't just the rich Southeast, and considered as such. So I know that Chris and I and others will all be continuing to do that, and I'm sure you all will too. So please back us on that. But Adam will send out all of that information with the minutes of this meeting and any links to any of the Bayes documents too. So thank you for that. Okay, unless there are any queries, we'll move on to item 3, which is about the skills COVID-19 recovery document. I'm going to hand over to Louise in a minute, but just to say, obviously it's, this came out of the last board meeting where we talked about reallocating some of the GPF money towards a recovery for COVID recovery. And we're seeing in all of the news at the moment, the impact of COVID, particularly on young people. And I'm sure Angela will know about that in depth at the moment. And some of the figures that Louise has put in this report are some quite stark reading, with 10.2% unemployed. So I'd just like to hand over, if Louise is around, I can't see her on my screen, but hand over
Yeah.
to Louise. Oh, you're there. Thank you. Sorry, I lost
No
you.
worries.
in
People
all of
move
the people.
around, don't they? Yeah.
They do. Thank
I'm
you.
going to attempt to share my screen, hoping the technology works. So if you just bear with me and let me know if you can see what I'm about to show you. So it's just a presentation. Can you see that?
Yes, fine.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, the technology is working. So I'm Louise Aitking. I'm skills lead for the South East SELEP. And as Sarah said, you've got in your packs kind of the detail behind what I'm going to talk through, but I just thought it would be useful to kind of share some of the headlines in terms of what we're seeking to do. So essentially today we're here to seek your approval for the focus of the £2 million COVID Recovery Fund and agree the process and criteria for that. And just to inform you that the Accountability Board will be required to approve the procurement approach and the value for money and delegation of decision making to SELEP's Chief Executive Officer. So just by way of background, as you'll recall at the June meeting, it was agreed to repurpose £2 million of Growing Places Fund for a Skills COVID Recovery Fund. Since that time, I've been doing a lot of work to consult with key stakeholders. Those include the LEP Skills Advisory Panel, the Skills Working Group, Digital Skills Partnership, Coastal Working Group and local authorities, and actually a great deal more. Kind of every single organisation I've spoken to, I have consulted about this. So kind of our ESF projects, for example, the Prince's Trust, some of the sector skills councils we work with, as well as having regular conversations with the Department for Work and Pensions, the Department for Education and Digital Culture, Media and Sport. Because obviously with a lot coming out through government, that's been really important. This is just a visual. Adam always teases me that I squash logos, but I was trying to get as many as possible on here. So this just gives you a visual in terms of some of the organisations we've consulted with and some of the members of the Skills Advisory Panel and Digital Skills Partnership. And I think it just kind of articulates how strong the employer engagement has been in this as well, which has been obviously really important. So alongside all of that consultation, we've been doing a lot of evidence gathering, as is reflected in the paper, and as Sarah kind of noted, it's kind of painting quite a stark picture. But we've also been looking at the existing government support, so taking account of that. So I guess some of the standout pieces of information are that 160,000 people in July were claiming out of work benefits across the LEP area compared to 64,000 the same time last year, which is obviously pretty stark. We also at the end of June had 553,500 people furloughed, which is 34% of the workforce, and some of those are obviously already coming out, but we can assume that some of those may add to the unemployment figures. And again, as we reflected in the paper, certain sectors have been adversely impacted, where kind of we've seen really high rates of furloughing in sectors like arts, creative and hospitality, as you would expect. And of course, in August, we had the confirmation that the UK has entered the deepest recession since records began. So this is just a visualisation of those out of work benefits, just to sort of show the climb that we've seen. And obviously that's something we continue to monitor. The data takes a little time to catch up, but we speak regularly to Job Centre Plus and DWP. I guess being slightly more optimistic, the other thing we've been tracking are vacancies. So we did see a huge decline in the early stages of COVID, but as you can see from this graph, comparing 2020 with 2019, things are starting to pick up a little bit. And I was on a call yesterday with the organisation that kind of monitor all the vacancies, and they said that things are starting to pick up more nationally as well. And obviously there are certain sectors that we've seen, if not steady demand, increased demand, such as driving, care, health, teaching, warehouse and construction jobs. So therefore, all of that points in the direction of supporting individuals of all ages into work, and particularly into those sectors that are still recruiting, and areas such as IT and food production as well being really important. The feedback we received very strongly was that the funding should be employer-led, flexible and supporting all ages, which is in some ways distinct from some of the government funding that has kind of parameters around it. We also found through our research, again, that won't come as a surprise, but COVID exacerbated the digital divide. Through our Digital Skills Partnership, we'd already seen that there was a huge digital divide that was kind of removing certain people from the labour market or making it harder to get access to the labour market. And of course, this has been exacerbated by COVID. So a very rough estimate is that 333,000 people don't have internet access, but we know that far larger numbers will have only limited access. So it might be pay as you go, and they'll have lack of appropriate kit. So therefore, you know, applying for a job or accessing training on a pay as you go device becomes very challenging. And you know, if we talk about an inclusive economy, this is clearly an important area, but also accessing digital skills, so from basic right through to more advanced. And again, I was speaking to Skills for Care just yesterday, who said that they'd seen a really increased need for basic digital skills in care homes, because the world has changed to such an extent that those skills have come to the fore, and it's a real challenge because not everybody's comfortable with it. So we've also seen gaps emerging in provision and the ability to adapt. So obviously higher need for online learning and virtual reality, and particularly aligned to our kind of sectors. And we are proposing that a portion of the 2 million is a more flexible pot. So hopefully you're aware of the SELEP sector support funded tutor bursary programme, which is reflected in the becomealecturer.org website. It's been really successful. It's helped to tackle the issue of tutor shortages in FE predominantly, and has received an extension. We've had an awful lot of interest in it nationally and from other LEP areas. So it strikes us that we have the opportunity to use a portion of this pot to tackle similar issues such as online learning, maybe supporting with access to the apprenticeship levy and government support and funding, and to kind of really be innovative and leading in the way that we approach things where it's not addressed by mainstream government money. So therefore, again, the paper goes into more detail, but the proposed procurement packages that we are recommending are a pathway to jobs in growth sectors, maximising jobs arising through the digital revolution, which would cut across all sectors, because clearly that's a need across all. Digital skills for all, which would help us with the getting kit, connectivity and training to bring everybody up to that. We were talking about levelling up to that agenda as well. And innovative solutions to skills barriers, which again is the kind of tutor bursary type approach, being able to tackle other issues. And we've also recommended a small pot for project management, which we would share with the business support COVID fund, and which you will hear about at the October board. So that would enable kind of regular project management on an ongoing basis. And there are general principles for the funding to include LEP-wide coverage, not to duplicate existing government funding, and delivery within 1 year of the contract. And I've just set out some of the government funding that's there at the moment to make sure that kind of we're not duplicating with this. So we'll make it a condition that it needs to complement. Some of these are quite specific in what they're supporting, but clearly there's a lot out there at the moment and we need to make sure we're working with it. We're speaking to government about various of these, including the National Retraining Scheme, and our hope is that the work we do through this fund will help us to attract further funding and to work more in partnership with government in areas such as retraining. In terms of next steps, the Accountability Board on the 18th of September, as I said earlier, will look at the proposed procurement approach and that side of things. And pending that and today's agreement, we would seek to launch procurements in October or from October 2020, working in consultation with those key groups I mentioned earlier. And we're proposing that we have panels formed of either members of those groups or colleagues from local authorities to just ensure the kind of local view and input to the evaluation. and winning bidders would be required to provide regular reporting to yourselves, and that would be collated by the project manager we're recommending, and we'll have continued consultation with government. We're speaking to them regularly, the various government departments, and we would look to, pending today, we would look to launch this. We have an online event on the 8th of October that hopefully you can join us for, and that seems to be a kind of really apt time to launch this. So I think, that concludes my slides. I'll stop sharing my screen. Sorry, I think somebody had their hand up during that, so apologies. Open to any questions.
Thank you, Louise. That's very comprehensive. Mark Coxall, you had your hand up.
Yes, yeah, I was just going to query it because obviously you mentioned it, we mustn't duplicate, and we're going to target in the order in 5.9, and you mentioned it again. And if you look at the paperwork on there, it says like you ensured no duplication from central government, and then you've got your targeting, and you're targeting healthcare, which is going to be duplicated by the central government, and then put logistics, which is a huge increase in the bottom of the list with engineering, and then you've added rural and coastal economy into our sectors, which is, I would think you really shouldn't you have it as targeting in certain areas, and then they go through that, then the next level into targeting in sectors. I've never seen a area and a sector in the same targeting area list.
Yeah, apologies. That was my error. I think rural economy, I was trying to reflect the kind of food growing and production where there'll be jobs. Coastal economy was more that there may be a higher need to get individuals from those areas into jobs. So sorry, that was a bit confusing. But I think obviously we're seeking to get people into the jobs that actually exist, which was the kind of reason for listing out those sectors.
Yeah, but you've got to target in that prioritise the cash in that order. So obviously it's quite an important list to actually decide on prioritisation for us as a group. If we're then going to spend this money in healthcare with the duplication if the central government's doing the healthcare.
So at the moment, there are no kind of government plans. I guess as we draw any tenders up, we would make sure that there's nothing happening on a government level for that particular sector. So that was the reason for keeping the funding as flexible as possible, is that government funding is obviously changing daily at the moment. So we're keen to make sure that we keep our funding flexible enough to respond to that and not to duplicate. But our conversations with the sector is that the needs are so high that there's not too much risk, I think, that there is a need there definitely to get people into those sectors. Yeah,
you see a growth at least. I don't see why logistics is right at the bottom. And if you're saying that rural and coastal economy is food production instead of and that would be instead of rural and coastal, so it's like healthcare, food production, logistics. So we could change, we could change the order of priority if that would work for where the volume of jobs are highest. That would be the thing, where the job vacancies, and for this, I don't know, I've not seen any job vacancies. I've seen a large amount of job vacancies in this area for logistics, with a massive move through COVID into the home deliveries, into a massive engineering, and the work thing. I think Angela's got a hand up now, and I understand healthcare, but I've not seen as much as that when there's been all over the news and bits and pieces, and there's been a huge thing. But I think I have seen huge job vacancies in logistics daily. Huge amounts of numbers, and we need to retrain and put that into logistics. So I just thought that was much higher. It's definitely a priority, so just to reassure you, it's there because it's a priority. So apologies, it's probably a bit confusing, the wording.
Thank you, Louise. And I think also the key is that it's complementary to any national government initiatives, and that we need to keep that as one of the key criteria. So I have various people with their hands up, and I will try to go in order. So I've got Joe James, then Anna Christie, Graham Peters, and then Angela O'Donoghue. So Joe, please first.
Thank you, Louise. I thought that was a very good paper. I just want to, I've got 4 points, so if I can get them all in at one go. But before I say that, I just wanted to say that obviously the government launched the Kickstarter programme this week, so I think there's opportunities there for us to further help support 18 to 24-year-olds. But obviously the chambers are acting as intermediaries for those with less than 30 vacancies. So I think there's some joined up working we could potentially do there. That's a separate conversation. So I've got 4 questions, so I'll answer them all in one go. Will measures be put in place to ensure that outputs are quite geographically spread on these projects? You mentioned the bursary programme, which was really good, really successful, but quite disproportionate in its outputs in across the SELEP area. So there's no mention in what I've read about geographical spread of outputs. Will we be doing that?
Definitely, yes, yeah. We'll make it a condition, as you say, that it's proportionate to the area. So yeah, we'll definitely build that in.
Okay. And can you just clarify, is the final decision making on the projects to be funded, is that actually with the accountability board or is it with Adam? I just want to make sure that we're sort of, dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's really. And if it's going to be Adam, our CEO, will the projects that he selects for funding, will they actually go back to the accountability board for endorsement? Or is it just purely his decision along with the small group?
I guess the final decision will be Adam's, partly for kind of speed of getting these things underway because of obviously the sort of timeliness of this. But we'll also follow the procurement processes. So all of the applications that come in will be subject to Essex County Council's procurement processes. So there'll be kind of, it's just that the final decision will rest with Adam, but I think we'll have reached a good conclusion probably prior to that. It's just built in as an extra security, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the 45,000 for the digital skills, the match, could you just explain to me a little bit about what that is? And also you mentioned it's sort of about the 35k for project management, and you said this will be shared with the business support fund. I just want to also clarify, is that 35 that we're having the total? Or are we looking at also taking 35 from the business support fund, which will be the 70,000 pot? I can't anticipate it being that because that's a lot for project management role, but I just wanted to check.
Yeah, it would be 35 each is the proposal from the skills and the business support pot. So it's kind of accounting for on costs and that kind of thing as well. That would be shared between the two. But the digital skills partnership reference is a kind of contingency budget. So we've had an initial conversation about potentially a year 3 for the digital skills partnership, and I think the options will be greater if we've got match funding to put into that. And the digital skills partnership has been really successful, and so we would want, I think, to use that opportunity to hopefully secure further government funding. So that's at a very initial stage at the moment, so that's why it's in there, and maybe other options will arise with other government departments. So it's just a relatively small amount that we would monitor, and obviously if those options don't arise, we would put it into retraining or something that fits and bring it back to yourselves for approval.
Okay, I have to say, even with on costs, from where I'm sitting, unless I'm just exceptionally tight, which may well be the case, 70,000 is quite a lot for somebody to manage two funds. I'm sure you've looked into that, but it just seems quite excessive to me. So I just wanted to pass that comment.
I mean, we'll obviously look into that and get it. It would be graded would be subject to the usual grading and pay scales of Essex County Council as our accountable body. But I guess that's the maximum figure. It's not the kind of definite figure, if that makes sense.
And as a board, will we get to see the projects that you're proposing to select, Adam, or are you just going to notify us as the outcome once you've selected those that are going to be funded?
I think it will be a case of, again, for kind of speed, if we've been through the process of procurement, we would notify you of those that have been successful, that will have been through all due process.
No, that's perfect. I'm all for speed. So I just wanted to just clarify what the procedure was. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jo. Right, so I have Anna, then Graham, then Angela, then Ron. I've also noted your hands up. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's a great scheme. I just want to make sure that Mark mentioned it earlier, that there is maximum flexibility in the type and level of training provision, and that the monies are not to be as prescriptive as the ESF funding. Also, just to make sure that there isn't a focus on sectors, but it has to be on the local area and what the needs are in the local area, because that will be very different in East Sussex compared to Kent and Essex. And also that any chosen providers are actually working with the federated skills boards to agree what those priorities are during, before and during the contract.
Yeah, so absolutely agree with you on all of those points, and I think we've probably learnt some lessons from ESF. So part of our reasoning for involving local colleagues in the evaluation is to make sure that those points are picked up. We would build it into the procurement that goes out, that they have to illustrate that they've worked with federated areas and got employer engagement as well. So I think we'll make it a condition of the kind of procurement that goes out, and absolutely we would work with local areas to make sure that whatever we put out is taking due account of local need, and that we work closely. I guess having a project manager is really important in that sense, in monitoring the projects and making sure that's definitely taking place.
Thank you. Graham.
Thank you, Sarah. Anna's in fact effectively asked the questions that I was going to, so thank you for those answers, Louise. The only final thought is that I'm sure you will be thinking about this, but we need to ensure that contractors, whoever they may be, are not just going to go for the low-hanging fruit, whatever those may be. Now, normally that's ensuring that rural gets a fair crack of the whip. I would say that as the chairman of the rural board. Because it's hard work to get out and penetrate rural areas, whereas it's easy to do it in town centres. So just, I'm sure you will have been thinking about that, but just to ensure that's on your agenda. Thank you, Louise. But good stuff, great paper, exciting. Looking forward to it coming to fruition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Angela.
Just 2 points really. The first thing is to say that it's very, very welcome, but £2 million across a whole LEP area is not going to go very far. So my plea would be, let's not make the procurement process so restrictive that for the amount of money that you're going to get tuppence, basically. So that would be my first plea. And also to say that if it's successful, perhaps it's something that the LEP could consider doing on a more, in the future, because the point of the bid and the things that we were talking about at the skills advisory panel were that actually an awful lot of stuff is already funded. So as Mark said, health and social care, there's lots of funding out there to run lots of training for adults, for young people, etc. But if you look at a sector like logistics, there's no training that's funded, or very little. You can get some training for warehousing and stuff like that. But if you're lorry driving, for example, there's no funding for, you can't get that from any government funding. So the idea of these programs was to try and say to people, this is for things that can't be funded elsewhere. And I think that's been our mantra throughout it, really, because we don't want to duplicate training, for example, on the first one that you could get funding for somewhere else, but with less outcomes, if you like, than might be required by government funding. So it really was focused on the added value that you could add to people to get them ready to get into employment, because to get into employment in a lot of sectors, you need a specific qualification, which quite often is not funded by the government.
I think we've got an amazing opportunity, as you say, Angela, really, and hopefully we can prove a model and almost treat some of these as pilots to show government what's possible. That would be the optimum, I suppose, that this attracts further funding.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela. Ron.
Thank you, Sarah. It seems like most people, trouble about going a bit down the list, everybody speaks and takes out your thunder. What I would like to say is I feel very sorry for our young people and people that are currently unemployed or will potentially have been unemployed and need the training. We've had over the last 12 years 3 possible hits, especially to our young people. We've had the 2008 recession. Then we had the government saying to the elderly, you can work for as long as you want, there's no fixed retirement age. And combination of both those put 1 million young people with no vision, no future. And we all know that young people with no future and no vision end up being in all sorts of trouble with potentially crime and drugs and antisocial behaviour and everything. We need to make sure people, young people especially, are trained, and I really am very supportive of this. And we're now looking at a 3rd hit in 12 years coming up with COVID. We as a country, let alone the LEP area, cannot afford our young people or relatively young people that have lost their jobs, need retraining and reskilled. And we need to get that in place, because otherwise these are the people that can support us, well me anyway, because I'm an old person anyway, in terms of our pensions and our future and this country. And we're going to do our utmost. And I think Angela's right, £2 million in what we're trying to do, it doesn't seem a lot in the scale of things. And we really need to make sure we're effective on the ground in delivering through our known partners. We don't need a national provider with no knowledge of our area. We know our area, our trainers know our area, and we need to make sure that that takes place. And let's use some of our existing training partnerships that we've got. You know, all right, we've got to go out to procurement, but let's look at these people. Let's look at what we've got. And just one thing that was like, I know, David, just to give some assurance that you feel comfortable with the fact that the money to administer all this is sufficient, because I know what it's like sometimes. These things get out of control or whatever, or you try and do too much, and you'll end up paying more than what you think is going to come your way in terms of administrating this. And I know, knowing you, by the way, I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen, but I just wanted to mention that. But really, we can't afford not to do this. We really need to make sure that there is sufficient funds to do what we want to do, because I do worry about our young people going forward. They've lost years of opportunities, and we've got to make sure they don't lose many more. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Important points well made. Yes, don't worry, Graham, I have seen you. So I have Aideen, Joe, Graham and Carol. It's obviously an area that provokes much discussion, which is great to see the interest and passion from this board. Thank you. So Aideen.
I just want to echo the point that yes, £2 million is not a lot of money, and that's really why we got to make every penny count. And I just, for my clarification, I would like a better understanding of the measure of jobs outcome, of that output. How are we actually measuring that? Is it the fact, because I notice in the document it says supporting into jobs. Is that measurement, is it going to be measured by an amount of time off the register, or is it softer interventions to get to a certain skill level? How do we make the most of this money, and how do we make it work for us?
Yeah, we would put in job outcomes. So we expect to see certain numbers of people getting into a job as a result of the intervention that takes place. I guess there's an interesting balance between us being too prescriptive, that we're not having the flexibility we seek. So it's a difficult balancing act, but we will have some kind of minimum targets that we would expect people to reach. In terms, the fundamental thing, I think for me, the important thing is getting people into jobs and jobs that are actually there. So the kind of appropriate training that takes place is important as well, but ultimately we want people to get into jobs. So there are targets that are attached, and we've set out those preliminary targets in the paper, but we'll will obviously add probably to those, because there'll be sub outputs that we would seek to achieve. But I think that's where the project management is important. I should also mention that there'll be kind of procurement and legal costs in there. So just going back to Joe's question about the 70k, I think that we've incorporated those costs in as well.
Thanks, Louise. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the procedures that you've put in place will allow some flexibility, and it looks like it's not going to slow down the procurement and delivery process, which I think is key. And at the last board meeting, it's something we all felt very strongly about. And I do agree with Angela and others that it's not a huge amount over the SELEP area, but actually I just want it noted that actually I'm really pleased for once that we are actually, regardless of the amount, investing in something outside of infrastructure. So, you know, to me, it's a good start, and hopefully we can do more of it. And finally, on the last thing I'll say is that, you know, we have some fantastic colleges and universities across our SELEP area. And, you know, moving forward, I think we need to be looking at a lot more work, and actually, how can we maximise on that to actually, you know, upskill our workforce? Because, you know, we've got some great colleges and universities, and I think we could be doing more with them going forward. Not sure what, but there is opportunity there. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Joe. Graham?
That segues very neatly into what's become a rather tedious hobby horse of mine for some, which is revisiting the £3.5 million that effectively got released because government did agree to go ahead with the 1/3 that they'd withheld at some point. That has now gone back into the GPF pot, and is, I understand, going to be allocated, and we probably decided to make to do that, but it's allocated to infrastructure projects. But we did have a great deal of freedom around that GPF pot. Is it too late and impossible to revisit that and consider spending some of it on an extension of these sorts of absolutely vital programs, rather than infrastructure, which may or may not be critical to so many lives?
Suzanne, could you answer that? Thank you.
Yes, no, that's fine. So I think at this point it probably is, but what we have got coming is more repayments. So I think it's about having a discussion about what we do with those future repayments that come. We've got projects that were in the pipeline, have been told they can come forward. They've done their business cases. They're ready to come forward. I think it would be a difficult decision now to effectively change course at this point, but it is a revolving it's a revolving fund, so there are future opportunities. So it's not a hard no, Graham.
If I may, very quickly, I know it would be difficult to change tack, but this is an unprecedented crisis. Ron has made a case very passionately for how important it is to our young people. Difficult is maybe what we should be thinking about doing.
I think that we might have, people will have submitted their business cases for approval by the time we next come to make a decision. So I think what has come back would have already been reallocated, because the next decision point would be in October.
Okay, and I mean, the board previously agreed that allocation, didn't it? I'm right in saying that.
Yeah, so the agreement is
to reverse a board decision if we were going to do something like that, Graham.
Yeah.
Okay, so Carol, please, and then Claire, I think.
Hi everybody, hello. I just wanted to just make a comment. Thank you very much. I've lost you now. I've gone the lady that did the presentation. I thought it was very good. But I also think that actually it reinforces how important it is actually having business as part of the SELEP and the local enterprise and partnerships that are structures, and working together to actually achieve the same targets. I'm very interested in, perhaps isn't the right moment to discuss, but there's things like, for example, the apprenticeship schemes that don't work in certain sectors within. Perhaps there's an opportunity to discuss that at some point in terms of actually how that might work for certain sectors. So, for example, rural grown food apprenticeships, we pay levies, but we don't actually utilise them because they don't work. So it's just saying that there are these funding streams that actually could potentially be repurposed or looked at, if you like, And the other thing, I just, again, my little hobby horse, if you like, is EU exit. That's the other challenge we have coming as well. And having the right people with the right skills, with the right training, and the right support to get into different sectors, industries, whether it's distribution, whether it's growing food, etc., is going to be even more important to us as a country, and particularly to our region.
I'd be happy to have a conversation, Carol, about the apprenticeship levy, and really pleased to explore that further, because that sounds very valid, and there is some work we're doing on that sort of thing. So that sounds like a useful conversation.
But do you want to just ping me an email, and we can schedule something in? That'd be great.
Will do. Fab. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's a good point. It may be worth in the future also looking at certain areas that we're going to discuss at length at the board meetings, such as the apprenticeships, for example. So maybe we can look to the officers to look into those kind of areas, because I think there are probably several that we should be looking at.
I think the other thing, Sarah, is also really important, is that because of this group and what we're doing and lots of the other bits, the part with further education and the further education colleges that we have as part of our area, I think those discussions that have been going on and those networking opportunities, I think have started to pour out some very rich sources of information, help and support for businesses.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. Okay, so I've got Claire and then Mark. And then I'm conscious of time, so we may need to draw this to a close. So
I just wanted to come back to something that Joe said. We do have some very good academic institutes in our region, but there is quite a bit of difference in how much they actually engage with local businesses in determining what provision they provide as far as training is concerned. So I think if this fund can help promote that more, to make sure they do engage to provide the courses we actually need, rather than the ones that are a bit more shiny, should I say, then that would be good.
Thank you, Claire. Mark?
Yeah, I've just seen, after this conversation, I started the conversation, I just want to make sure when we vote on this, that we, as I take it, we've had an agreement now that it's going to be across the whole SELEP. So the order of priorities should be in the order of that priority is going to be removed in the targeting of and how you procure this. And can we move logistics up instead of right at the bottom? And swap it with healthcare to make sure it's in actually, because obviously this is the only option for the board to make the decision process and the procurement process, and it says that this is going to be priority to the rural and coastal areas. I'm assuming that's fair enough. It sounds like it's a reasonable thing, but some areas of the SELEP may not get anything if you're going to carry on with in that order. If you haven't, so it just needs to make sure that the procurement is correct. And we've not really, with conversation, and the conversation today was quite a few people are saying it should be across the whole LEP. Quite a few people, like I agree with Angela, that logistics is underfunded by the government in hardly any, and we just need to look at how that targeting is before we vote.
Okay, I've got a couple of other people who want to say things. So Louise, do you want to think about that for a minute, and then come back to us? So I've got Perry and then Ron.
Just on the point of order, and I think Mark makes a very good point there, Louise, and I think we just need to review that in view of the evidence-based information you've got. So I think it's really down to you with all the work you've done, and evidence is going to drive the decision on this, not emotion. And the other thing is, I just want reassurance, Suzanne, if I can, on point 7.2, which is regarding the 35,000 of funding to be ring-fenced. Having gone through the subcommittee review that we did on the funding of the Secretariat, I'd like some reassurance as a board member. It's not going to put even more pressure on you with regard to managing the Secretariat finances.
Yeah, that's why we were that sort of 35,000 from this part and the 35,000 from the business support SME part, that then will sort of have a neutral effect on our budget. So as Louise mentioned earlier, that's not all just the project manager, that then would pick up the other on costs that procurement naturally brings. There'll be a cost of procurement support, a cost of legal support, and so on. So
okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Perry. Ron?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm not going to talk about this much. I just wanted to sort of tell you a little bit of story about me and why I'm so passionate about our young people. I left school, barely could read or write, and my local factory put me through an apprenticeship, taught me a hell of a lot in a short space of time. And by 18, I was designing machinery, equipment, making molds for ever-ready batteries and automation, and then moved into management with another company. And it started with that apprenticeship. It started with a company having faith in what I could do. And so much so that at 44, I retired. And because of that beginning, and that's why I believe what we can do around the skills, what we can put in there into our young people is very, very important, because they are our future. And I keep saying it, whatever way we want to list this work and whatever, all of it is important. It's important to our area, it's important to the country, and very much so important to our young people. And that's a little bit of me, and that's why I'm so passionate about people, and young people especially, needing these skills, needing this leg up into their futures. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. I think we've seen the passion of everybody actually in the board about this area, so it's very good to see. Louise, I said I was going to come back to you in terms of the order. Can you just tell us what you now would recommend?
Yeah, I think perhaps saying prioritisation was misleading, because I think the point was that we were picking out sectors where there is the greatest demand. So that list in itself is the priority of the sectors that we would be targeting, notwithstanding if government money suddenly tackles those. So logistics is, I guess you could say, on an equal footing with the other sectors that are listed, if that makes sense, if that works for you.
Is the board happy with that? Okay, so I'd like to...
Well, that's agree. No, that's removing the words in this order of priority then, yeah?
Yeah.
In that order of priority.
We are focusing on these sectors will be tackled.
Yeah, as long as the priority bit's missing, it doesn't matter, does it? And it's like, and it's not, and it's carrying on with the making sure that there's the other government programs would be the first thing. Is there another funding stream which then removes them? And then are they one of these that we're going to prioritise in? Is it in a rural or coastal area? And then it can move forward and Adam can approve it. As that would be the procurement I would see.
Yeah.
Would that be something that would be? Yeah, okay, thank you. That's really fair.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like us to agree, do we agree that the focus process and criteria for the £2 million sector skills COVID-19 recovery fund as set out in the paper with the amendments that we have just agreed? Could I see a raise of hands, please? Adam?
You're on mute, Adam.
Oh dear, schoolboy error. 4 physical raised hands and 13 electronic raised hands there. So we're good on that one, Sarah.
Thank you. If you could lower your hands. And then we need to note that the Accountability Board will be required to approve A, the proposed procurement approach, B, the award of funding with consideration of value for money, and C, delegation of decision-making to SELEP CEO in respect of delivery of the programme, including the award of grant funding or contracts within the £2 million Revenue Skills COVID-19 Recovery Fund. Is that noted by everybody? Thank you. Okay, so thank you for that. That was really great to see everybody's thoughts about that. And I think it's a thing we will be revisiting as we go forward. And thank you. Can I thank Louise? She really does do the most amazing job in skills, and we should be very proud of all of the work that she does. So thank you, Louise. Okay. I'm mindful of time, so let's move swiftly on to the COVID-19 economic impact update and strategic direction. If I could ask officers, please, Helen and Sharon, to speak, but could I ask you to be brief, mindful of the time? Thank you.
Hi, morning everyone. Yes, conscious of time, so I'll do my best to go through this as quickly as I possibly can. I'll just try and share my screen now. Hopefully that will work. And could you just let me know you can see it?
I can't see it yet, Helen.
Not at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Your video's off, so I wonder if it's linked somehow.
Wait, let me try that.
There you go.
Is that better?
It's coming on. Yeah.
Okay, great. As I say, I'll try and be brief. The purpose of this session really was to update you on the work that we're doing to understand the current impact, economic impact across SELEP, and to use this really to start to talk to you about the priorities for a future production of the SELEP strategy. Building on the discussion at the last board, we have now created the data and intelligence page. Hopefully you can see this on your screen, which gives an overview of national and SELEP level economic and health data, showing kind of key trends and headlines. And these are updated monthly, and where possible are broken down at the district and federated levels. Rather than go through the intelligence in detail, you do have the link to all of this in your paper, but maybe we'll just highlight maybe just a few things that might be quite key to note before the discussion. As Louise said, we've got over a third of the workforce currently receiving furlough payments. Medway, Thurrock and Colchester are seeing some of the highest levels of those, but you'll see on the graph on the right here, when we look proportionately to those in work, Castle Point and Rochford actually have the highest rate, with over half of the workforce in the furlough scheme. And actually, as you can see, Castle Point nearly at 60% there. Looking at the job postings, although these have fallen dramatically since the crisis, June and July have definitely seen an upturn in vacancies and job postings, but we're still at around 20,000 fewer than we were this time last year, around 80,000 currently being posted. But although these aren't directly correlated, these two data sets, as you can see, Castle Point, for example, has the highest number on furlough, but conversely has the lowest number of vacancies. So although furlough doesn't mean redundancy or job losses, it's an indication of challenges potentially. And then you can see conversely that isn't then supported necessarily by sort of a reasonable number of vacancies in the area. So it just starts to build up that sort of local picture a little more about who might be affected. Moving on to self-employment, we have an additional 193,000 people claiming self-employed income support. Medway is seeing both the highest volume, but also the highest rate as a proportion of the self-employed workforce. As you can see, 95% making claims against that scheme, closely followed by sort of Harlow and Thurrock there. In terms of universal credit, anything I would sort of say about this is the locality aspect, I guess, because Lou's mentioned this. June did actually see a reduction, but July has seen an upturn again in claims. Kent and Medway have the highest volume at around 71,000 claims, but again, proportionately, South Essex have a higher rate, with 417 claiming out of every 10,000 of the population. We've also looked at this actually in coastal and non-coastal variants, and coastal districts, maybe unsurprisingly, or areas are seeing a higher proportion of claims. In terms of business support, almost 800 million now has been drawn down in grants across the area, with Wealdon and Medway seeing the highest values. However, as a proportion of businesses, Thanet, Tendring and Hastings are seeing the highest proportions of those grant claims being made. And again, coastal areas are seeing a higher than normal proportion of those grants. Just in terms of the sort of growth hub, you'll probably know this, but although levels in terms of inquiries and referrals have certainly reduced since the April peak, they are still, as of July, double that of the pre-pandemic levels. So that support is obviously still in high demand. And as you can see from the pie chart on the right, through their questionnaires, job losses are certainly being consistently reported, and sectors such as tourism and hospitality and retail are seeing some of the highest levels of those. So just to finish sort of the intel point in terms of sectors, as you'll know, nationally, there's been a record fall in services, production and construction outputs as of Q2. Retail, accommodation and food have certainly seen by far the largest number of employments furloughed across the country. Retail at nearly 2 million, accommodation and food at nearly 1.7, closely sort of followed really by manufacturing at over 1 million. This is kind of I suppose reinforced by the concern of job losses, as we're hearing kind of the major companies reporting those significant losses, and in some case administration, with a lot of prevalence in aviation, tourism and retail. Virgin Atlantic being the latest this morning, announcing a further 1,000 job losses. Unfortunately, sector data isn't readily broken down by district level, so it makes it actually quite hard for us to create a SELEP picture for sectors. So you can see from the graph on the left, though, we do have that regionally. As you can see, you know, in terms of the southeast and east regions, we're actually falling behind. We're behind or at sort of national levels, really, in terms of furloughs, other than arts, entertainment and recreation, where the southeast is actually above UK levels. And energy production for the east. There are kind of outliers, which maybe isn't surprising given the kind of economic, you know, the prevalence of those kind of industries in those areas. But we are still working to build a better sector picture so we can understand the impact of sectors a bit more to support decision making going forward. So it's a very quick whistle stop through some of the intelligence. As I say, the link is in your paper to the web page, so please do look there. It is updated monthly. So we appreciate this is just a snapshot in terms of today's conversation, and also that locally a lot is being done to understand the local picture in terms of the impact on businesses and sectors, etc. Through some of the work that's already been undertaken by the federated areas and local authorities, there maybe unsurprisingly seems to be some sort of common themes emerging that are underpinning local plans and strategies, and they include a green recovery and how we secure that, digital capabilities, which Lou has obviously touched on from a skills point of view, but also in terms of broadband access and business adaptations. Hard hit sectors, again, we're hearing hospitality, retail, leisure, as well as aviation, obviously, come up quite readily. Business support in its wider sense in terms of access to finance, advice, diversification, and in some instances supporting startups, support for the unemployed and those at risk of, and many are also talking about the need to further accelerate capital infrastructure programs in order to secure and support jobs. So similarly, as Adam mentioned, you know, we need at a LEP level now to start really thinking about our priorities for a SELEP economic strategy, recovery strategy going forward. Adam's mentioned that part of the reason we haven't done this is wanting to wait for that white paper, and understanding that government now want us to produce these economic recovery and renewal strategies in place of what was the list, which we are obviously expecting anytime soon, and we believe obviously it's better to wait for that. But we aren't starting from scratch. We did do a lot of work around the list process. For those board members obviously that weren't in place in January when we last brought this to the board, just wanted to put this slide up to just remind people or inform people of what those kind of priorities were. The list had a very specific focus on productivity, and the government really being keen that areas focused on their distinctive opportunities and challenges. So we sort of settled on our broad strategic opportunities being around our role as a global gateway and what that means for inward investment and connecting UK markets to the southeast of the country, and of course in and around London. Communities for the future, that was partly around our 40% of the UK's allocation of garden communities, but our role in creating places to live and work for the future. And that may be particularly relevant now, given that working patterns and commuting patterns may well have changed or it been accelerated due to COVID. And last but not least, a focus on our coastal areas and the importance of promoting greater economic diversity, resilience and inclusion in our coastal areas. And the point that we have, coming back to the levelling up point in particular, we have some real challenges in terms of sort of the deprivation of some of our areas across the coast. These were underpinned by important cross-cutting issues, such as the need to equip the workforce with the right skill sets for the future, increasing innovation activity and R&D performance, and of course embedding that clean growth. So still very relevant, and we have a very strong evidence base that underpins all of this, which is still relevant, but obviously being supplemented by our kind of latest intelligence. As I mentioned earlier, we have published an interim, if you like, statement, our economic response statement, which talks about what the LEP is doing in its immediate response to the crisis, but also setting out a bit of a direction of travel in terms of where our future strategy might be placed. So some of these points were raised in the strategy as part of the work and the intel that we've done. These were all actually embedded in the lists already, but maybe obviously have come to the fore a little more given where we found ourselves in the current economy. So we're really keen to use whatever minutes we have just to get some of your views on whether you think these are the kind of right priorities to start underpinning work to develop that strategy, but also whether there might be things missing or that we want to focus more on. And, you know, specific sectors and places may well be part of that, given that, you know, for example, there may be more heightened challenges around our towns and high streets, as well as particular areas that are affected by this. And similarly with sectors that we know some will take a lot longer to recover than others, and others will have to change or adapt quite a lot to exist in a post-COVID economy. So that's a very whistle stop for me. I can leave this slide up if it helps for a couple of minutes, Sarah. Just appreciating that people have only just seen it, but really happy to, Sharon and I are happy to answer any questions, but really it was just to get some initial thoughts from the board about what those priorities might be so that we can start working those up.
Thank you so much, and thank you to both of you for all of the work that you are doing on this. It's really vital that we make informed decisions, and this intelligence is really key to it. I'm very conscious of time, so I would like to suggest that board members actually contact you directly, if that's all right, rather than go through have too much of a discussion at the moment, unless there are any passionate things. So I would like to suggest that you comment directly to Helen or Sharon if you need to, and I would like for us to note the economic intelligence update, which these are the recommendations. Note the economic intelligence update and agree that the SELEP officers continue to produce the information in this format. And note the update on the production of the economic recovery and renewal strategy, which is provided at this meeting, and discuss the best approach to producing the strategy. Okay, so as I say, if you could unshare your screen now, that would be useful, Helen. Thank you for all your work. I'm sorry that we haven't had the time to discuss it in detail, but as I say, I'm sure there will be some members who would like to talk to you potentially. Do I see your hand up just quickly, Carol?
Yeah, very, very quickly. Helen, I'm obviously new and I'm familiar with the sort of top line. If you could send me that last page, that would be really helpful, and that will give me your contact details so I can contact you directly, Helen. Thank you.
No problem, will do.
Yeah, perhaps if you could circulate that last page to all of the board members, that would be very useful, and then we can make sure we are able to come back to you with any detail of stuff. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, apologies for overrunning slightly. I'd just like to ask whether there are any other matters of business. No? Thank you all very much for coming to this board meeting, and thank you for that really good discussion on skills. Hopefully we'll all be able to have some more discussions like that, and some of this might be about the things we have just looked at in terms of the economic recovery and renewal strategy at later meetings. Very much appreciate your time. Always good to see you all, and we'll see you very shortly in October for the next board meeting and AGM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Well done. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.